One could argue that if Alira had only kept her mouth shut, she'd never have ended the long night betrothed to a man she had spent the better part of an hour insulting to his face. But then again, if the Alpha King had done one single useful thing in the 2 winters, he'd worn the crown, struck down one cruel law, or signed one honest decree, she'd have had nothing to complain of, and no cause to open her mouth at all. So, quote, weighed fairly, quote, when a person really sat down and thought it through, the whole catastrophe was his fault, every last frostbitten inch of it. Alira was the king's warden of the Winterwood, which was a very grand title for a woman who spent her life cold, wet, and alone, reading the forest for the things that did not belong in it. She could follow a 3-day-old track across bare stone. She could tell a poacher's height from the depth of his heel in the frost, and name a man by the smell of his cloak at 40 paces downwind. What she could not do, it seemed, for all her gifts, was sit quietly through one festival and let a bad night pass her by. She was not a drinker, she was even less of a talker. But the long night was the one night of the year. The wardens came down out of the black trees and into the warmth, and the great mead hall had gone gold and loud around her, and Lord Harrow had been watching her from across the central fire for 3 hours, with the patient, unblinking calm of a man who already believed he owned the thing he looked at. "He's just looking," said Pell, the youngest of them, in the voice of a boy who did not believe it either. "He's not just looking," said Tamsin, who had never once in her life lied to spare anyone's feelings. "He filed papers." Everyone in this hall knows he filed papers. And there it was, laid out on the scarred table between the cups, the thing none of them had wanted to say aloud. In Norvain there was a law, older than the throne itself, the right of claim, that said any lord of standing might file a suit upon an unmated wolf, and that if the long night burned all the way down to sunrise and she still stood unmated before the fire, she was his. Bound, marked, his to keep, to breed, to set to whatever use he pleased. Alira was 26, low-born as dirt and unmated, and somewhere in a clerk's cold, ink-stained hand there was a suit drying with her name written plain across the top of it. "It's a barbarous law," Alira said, and she said it too loudly, because the fear had curdled into anger somewhere in the last hour, and anger was the only one of the two she knew what to do with. And do you know why it still stands? It stands for exactly one reason. Because the man wearing the crown cannot be troubled to strike it. He's had 2 winters. 2. And in 2 winters our boy king has hosted 40 feasts and mended not one broken thing. He signs whatever's put in front of him and hunts whatever's driven onto his spears, and he lets the rest of us be handed off like breeding stock, because looking at it too closely might spoil his appetite. "Strong words," said a dry voice at her shoulder. She turned. She hadn't heard him sit down, which was itself remarkable, because hearing people was the whole of her trade. A man in a plain huntsman's oilcloak, the hood up despite the heat rolling off the hearth, a cup of dark mead cradled in one hand that he had not once lifted to his mouth. "Not strong," Alira said. "True. There's a difference, though I'll grant you a king's court forgets it. A king ought to know what's done in his name. This one couldn't find the injustice in his own kingdom if it walked up and bit him on the nose, and it is biting a great many people just now if he'd only bothered to look down." Under the shadow of the hood she could make out the lower half of his face and the faint suggestion of a smile that did not seem the least bit chastened. "Perhaps," the stranger offered mildly. "No one has told him. He's young. New to the office. It's a great deal to learn. Then no one's doing their work, and neither is he. He's the king. Not knowing is the one luxury the man isn't allowed." She set her cup down with the exaggerated care of a woman, entirely and infuriatingly sober. "You'd defend him, would you? Let me guess. You've met him. Handsome, is he?" "They always make them handsome in the portraits, whatever the truth of it. I'm told the portraits flatter him considerably. I'm told he wouldn't last a week doing an honest woman's work in the cold." Somewhere just behind her, Pell made a small, strangled noise, like a man watching a cart roll slowly toward a cliff. Elira only warmed to it, the way one warms to a fire one is standing much too close to. You think our good king has ever once been handed off to a stranger because a cruel man filed a paper? You think he's ever stood a double watch in a blizzard because a clerk couldn't count? He doesn't know how we live down here in the cold. And, worse than that, he hasn't the curiosity to find out. The stranger's smile widened where she could see it, slow and unbothered. And you'd say all of this to his face, I suppose? I'd say considerably worse to his face, Elira said, and I'd make him take notes while I did it. The whole table roared, and the approval went straight to her head, faster and sweeter than any mead ever had. It was, therefore, the very worst possible moment for a horn to sound at the great doors of the hall, one long, cold, ringing note that killed the laughter stone dead. A herald in harrows gray and crimson stepped into the firelight, unrolling a ribboned scroll. By suit filed and sealed under the right of claim, he called out, and his voice carried to every corner of the sudden silence. The Margrave Harrow claims the warden Elira of the Winterwood to be bound to him at sunrise. His flat eyes found her across the hushed room and stopped. And prove that mating before the fire, as the old law allows, and Elira, who had a good knife on her hip, and not one single husband in all the wide world, understood that she had until dawn, and not one heartbeat longer, to produce one out of the empty winter air. There's a particular terrible clarity that comes to a cornered creature, and Elira felt it arrive in her now, cold and total, sweeping the last of the mead warmth clean out of her head, and leaving everything sharp-edged and very bright. She had no mate, she had never once wanted one. A mate was a person who could be taken from you, or held over you, or used against you when the wind changed. A mate was a soft place, and Elira had built her entire life on the careful principle of being useful to everyone and beholden to no one living. But the law cared nothing for what she wanted. It cared only what she could prove before sunrise. With the fire as her judge, and she had nothing, and no one to prove it with. She had, however, a stranger at her shoulder. She turned to the hooded man, closed her fist in a great handful of his oilcloak, and hauled him down, so that her mouth was right at his ear, close enough to feel the heat of him. "Pretend to be my husband until sunrise," she whispered, fast and low and shaking, with how much she hated to beg for anything. "One night, that's all. Play the part, stand at my side to the right. Let me walk out of this hall, my own woman, and I will owe you anything you care to name, for the rest of my life, please." She felt him go very still against her hand. And then she felt, against her own cheek, the slow, unmistakable shape of the man beginning to smile. "Pretend," the stranger murmured back, turning the word over as though he'd tasted it, and found it a size too small for him. "No, I don't think I will." And then he straightened up out of her grip, unhurried as a cat in the sun, and raised his voice so that it rang clear off the rafters of the whole watching hall. "Let's make it a lifetime." Elira's stomach dropped clean through the floor and kept going. "You'll forgive my wife," the stranger went on, addressing the herald now as easily as if the two of them were discussing the price of grain, "for keeping so quiet about me these past weeks. I gave her my reasons, and they were good ones. But since we've all gathered to settle claims before the fire tonight," he leaned past her and set his untouched cup down on the table with a small, deliberate click, "I confess I should very much like to see the particular paper that says a man may bind a woman who is already spoken for. Read that part out for me, would you? Slowly, I'll wait as long as it takes." The herald faltered, the scroll trembling faintly in his hands. Across the fire, Lord Harrow himself rose from his bench, broad and slow and dark, a man plainly unaccustomed to being interrupted in anything. "And who," he said, and the word came out flat and dangerous, "would you be, huntsman, to stand up and speak for the king's own warden. Ah, a fair question. The fairest yet. The stranger reached up, and with two idle fingers pushed the hood back off his head. Elira's very first thought, traitorous, instant, and entirely her own, was that it was deeply, cosmically unfair for a face to do a thing like that in firelight. Her second thought was that she knew the face. It was stamped on the coins she was grudgingly paid in. It was hung in oils in the great cold portrait she walked past on the castle stair a dozen times a week. And where the painters had all managed to catch the dark hair and the straight nose well enough, what every last one of them had somehow missed entirely was the rest of him. The idle, loose-limbed, unhurried way he wore himself. The pale gray eyes far too quick and sharp for the lazy, easy smile they sat above. Expressly and with malice, for the ruin of otherwise sensible women, the mead warmth left the room entirely. Somewhere, a bench scraped back across stone. Somewhere else, someone forgot how to breathe. "Kaelin," said the Alpha King of Norvain pleasantly, to the hall at large, as though making an introduction at a garden party. "Though my wife may of course call me whatever she likes. She's already tried a fair number of names on me tonight, and I confess I enjoyed most of them." His gray eyes cut sideways to Elira, bright and merciless, and glittering with something that was not quite mockery. "Haven't you, my love?" Lord Harrow's face had gone the gray-white of cold tallow. He dropped to one knee on the stone. The herald dropped faster, the scroll forgotten. And all across the great hall the wolves of Norvain went down like a field of wheat, under a single passing wind, until the only two souls still on their feet were the king of all the land, and the low-born woman, who had, 5 minutes past, offered to make him take notes. Somewhere far down beneath her horror, in the oldest part of her, Elira's own wolf understood clearly that she ought to kneel as well. She did not kneel. She was, in fact, far too busy watching the king turn back to the trembling herald and say, in a voice as gentle as fresh-fallen snow and every bit as cold underneath it, "Strike the suit. My wife is claimed, and witnessed, and spoken for, by me, before this fire, and a king's given word is not the sort of thing a man takes back on a whim." Then he smiled down at her, slow and certain. "No pretending, warden. You asked me a question. I gave you my answer, and in Norvain, what a king says, before the fire is law by morning." And Elira stood alone in the roaring middle of it, bound tight by her own desperate mouth, to the single man in all the realm she had just finished loudly calling useless, and could not, for the whole life of her, decide whether she had just been rescued or very neatly caught. Dawn came the way that punishment always seems to, far too early, and much too bright. Elira had not slept. She had walked the long frozen path back to the warden's lodge alone under the dying stars, with the horrible new weight of the thing sitting square on her chest like a stone, and she had lain awake in her narrow bunk for what remained of the night, turning it over and finding no edge anywhere that she could get a grip on. Betrothed to the king, by law, by fire, by a hall full of witnesses who would all swear to it, she had meant to buy herself one single night of freedom. Instead, she had bought herself an entire lifetime. From a man who was quietly, thoroughly laughing at her. The whole while that was the part she kept snagging on. Not the crown, not even the law. The laughing. A king who would let a low-born woman insult him to his face for a full hour, and then bind himself to her before his entire court without so much as blinking, did not do such a thing out of tenderness or whim. He did it because it amused him or because it served some purpose she couldn't yet see, and Elira had spent her whole hard life learning one lesson above all others, that when a powerful person does a strange thing for no reason you can find, it is always because the real reason is one they would very much prefer you never found at all. "You're awake," said Tamsin from the doorway. She did not come in, and that, more than anything else, told Elira exactly how bad it truly was. "I'm awake. Do you remember it? Or am I going to have to be the one to tell you?" I remember every last word of it. Alira pressed the heels of both hands hard against her eyes until she saw sparks. That's rather the trouble, Tam. I remember all of it perfectly. Behind Tamsin, Pell hovered in the frost-cold hall, pale and miserable, trying his best to be cheerful, and failing at every step. It might yet be fine, he offered. He might have been in his cups. Kings forget things by morning, don't they, same as anyone. He'll wake up, and some clever advisor will remind him he's meant to marry a foreign princess for the good of the realm, and this whole business will just quietly. He wasn't drunk, Elira said flat. He never touched his cup. Not once, the whole night, I watched him. He knew precisely what he was doing every moment he did it, which was, of course, the part that truly frightened her, though she did not say so out loud. Tamsin and Pell traded a quick look between them, the specific, careful look of two people who have already discussed a thing in low voices and are now dreading the moment it has to be said aloud. What? Elira said. It isn't only the court that's talking. Tamsin came in at last and crouched down to Elira's level on the cold floor. The slow way you approach a person you're about to hand very bad news. Corwin's heard. The master of the hunt sent a runner for you before it was even properly light. He wants you, now. And Elira, he's in a state. I've served under that man 11 years and I have never once seen him in a state. That got her up off the bunk faster than anything else could have. Corwin had pulled her out of a snowbank with his own 2 hands when she was 9 years old, half frozen, and nobody's child and days from dead. And he had fed her and taught her and made her over long patient years into the only thing she had ever in her life been proud to be. Corwin did not get into states. Corwin had once talked a boar-mad wolf down out of a killing rage with both hands still in his pockets and a bored look on his face. If Corwin was afraid this morning, then the ground beneath her feet was a great deal worse than even she knew. She dressed, she washed the sleeplessness off her face in ice water. She walked the frozen path to the master's lodge, with her heart climbing steadily higher up her throat with every step, and she found the old man standing at his narrow window, with his back to the door and his shoulders squared and set, like a man braced hard against a coming blow. "Tell me the whole hall has it wrong," Corwin said, without turning around. "Tell me you did not stand up before the fire and let the king of Norvain speak a claim of marriage over you in front of the world." His voice was very quiet and very level, and that was the most frightening thing of all. "Tell me, Elira." "Master, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, girl, and we both of us know it." He turned then, and his weathered old face was doing something she had never once in 17 years seen it do. It was afraid, and not for himself. It was afraid for her. "Do you understand what you've become overnight? You are a thing the crown wants now, for some reason no one in this lodge can name, and in my long experience, things the crown wants have a way of being used, and used hard." And then he stopped himself short, dragged one broad hand slowly down his face. "Gods above, we need to think. We need to think very carefully and very fast about what exactly that man wants from you before he—" The horn sounded from the outer gate. Corwin's gray head came up sharp, like a hound catching a scent. It was the wrong horn, not the changing of the watch, not a rider come in from patrol with news, but the long, ringing, formal note that meant an arrival of high rank, one that no soul in the warden's lodge had cleared, and no one had been given the smallest warning of. And there was exactly one person in all the realm who could arrive unannounced at the very door of the master of the hunt himself, and answer to no one for it. Corwin went utterly still. And Elira, standing frozen in the middle of his floor and listening to the second note of the horn fade away into the sound of footsteps on the frozen path outside, unhurried, easy, sure, coming steadily this way, understood, before the door ever opened, that the king had not sent for her at all. The king had come to fetch her himself. The door opened, and the king of all Nervain walked into the little timber lodge, and the very air in the room changed. Aelira felt it before she had even fully turned to look. The air pulling taut and close around her, her own wolf coming to sharp attention beneath her skin, whether she willed the thing or not. She had known, of course, that he was the king, but the hooded man at the festival had let her forget it, had let her call him soft and useless and mean every word. This man let no one forget anything at all. He filled the low doorway, and then the whole cramped room, broad-shouldered and unhurried, and the idle laughing fool of the night before was simply gone. What stood in his place instead was a wolf who had never once in his life had to raise his voice to be obeyed. She had called him a soft thing to his face. Standing here now cold and sober in the thin gray light, Elira understood that she had been remarkably, breathtakingly stupid. "Ah," said Kaelin, and looked her slowly over, head to boots, with open and unhurried pleasure. "There she is. Taller by daylight, I find. I approve of very nearly everything about this arrangement so far." Corwin bowed, low and stiff. "Your Majesty, forgive me. I beg you. My warden was cornered and frightened last night, and frightened people say a great many foolish things before a hot fire. If a claim was spoken in haste, let it be as quietly unspoken. Whatever discipline is owed for the insult, let it fall on me and mine, and let the crown be troubled no further by it." The king listened to all of this with his head tilted a little to one side, and Elira had the sudden strange sense that he was not merely hearing the old man's words but weighing them, turning each one over in his hands and testing it for its true and hidden weight. Then he smiled. "Unspoken," he repeated, as though Corwin had proposed something genuinely delightful. "Master Corwin, I would sooner unsay my own name. Your warden asked me a plain question before a hall full of witnesses, and I gave her a plain answer. And a gentleman simply does not take back an answer merely because the morning has arrived and gone a little cold. It isn't done." "I did not ask you to marry me," Elira said, before she could stop her own mouth from doing the exact thing that had started all of this in the first place. "I asked you to pretend for one single night. And I improved considerably upon the request," Kaelin said, serene as a frozen pond. "You are very welcome." Corwin tried once more, quieter now, almost pleading. "Majesty, I beg you. Why bind yourself, and the whole realm with you, to a warden of the wood? You have turned away every match your own council has laid before you for 2 full winters. Great houses, foreign princesses with armies at their backs. And you choose her. Why?" Silence fell in the little room. The king looked at Elira. Elira looked steadily back at him, refusing to be the one to drop her eyes. And then Kaelin said, lightly, far too lightly, "Because she is the first person in 2 years to tell me the truth to my face." His gray eyes never once left hers as he said it. "Do you know how rare a thing that is, Master Corwin? I keep an entire court of clever men who would smile and bow and watch me walk into the winter sea, sooner than trouble me with news that the tide had come in. And then, last night, a woman stands up in a mead hall and informs me in front of everyone that I couldn't find an injustice if it crawled up and bit me on the nose." The corner of his mouth curved. "I found it refreshing." It was a glib answer and light as a feather, and there was something else entirely buried underneath it, something real and heavier, and Elira could not, for the life of her, tell which of the 2 parts he had actually meant for her to see. Corwin, defeated, straightened slowly. "Then, while you are here, Majesty, and if it please you, I would ask your leave to double the forest patrols. The business on the North Road last week has sat very ill with me indeed. A lame horse, and a bad bend in the dark, nothing more sinister than that." Kaelin waved one hand easy and dismissive. "Don't lose good sleep on my account, master, but double them by all means, if it settles your mind." Corwin bowed, plainly and deeply relieved. And when the king then asked, courteously, for a moment alone with his new bride, the old man had no possible grounds left to refuse him. The latch clicked shut behind him. They were alone. Your Majesty, Alira began, low and fast. You don't have to do any of this. I don't know what manner of game I've stumbled into the middle of, but I promise you I am not worth what it's going to cost you to keep playing it. Lift Harrow's claim off my neck if it pleases you, and then let me go quietly back to the trees. No one will so much as remember my name by spring, I swear it. Kaelin studied her in silence for a long, long moment, and slowly the idle amusement drained out of his face and left something quieter and far more unsettling behind it. You think very poorly of your own worth, he said at last, quietly, for a woman who tracked a murderer across 40 miles of bare stone last winter. In the dead of it, when 3 of her betters swore blind the trail had gone cold and dead. I read the reports, Warden. Every single one of them, going back years. I know exactly what you are. She had no answer at all to that, which was itself a rare and unwelcome thing. He rose and paused at the threshold. I'll send someone for you at dusk. Wear whatever you please. Though I am reliably given to understand it is customary for a wife to make some small effort. He was nearly through the door when he stopped, and did not turn back to face her. You asked me, out there by the fire, why a king would ever do a thing like this. His voice had gone quiet and lost all of its ease. You'll have your answer soon enough, Alira. Sooner, I think, than you're going to like. And then he was gone, and the graceful, careful refusal she had spent all morning building sat useless in her mouth, with nowhere left in the world to go. Supper was laid in a small, warm room high in the castle, and Alira sat in it like a prisoner awaiting the drop, wrapped in borrowed gray silk that made her feel every inch a hunting hound dressed up for a cruel jest. You keep glancing at the door? Kaelin observed mildly, over the rim of a cup that he still, she noted, had not once drunk from. I'm memorizing the way out. Force of habit, sensible. I do exactly the same in every room I enter as it happens. He set the untouched cup down. You've gone quiet on me, Warden, and I don't for a single moment believe it's shyness. I've heard you when you're not being shy. No. You're planning something behind those eyes. Go on then, out with it. Tell me the thing you're quite sure I shan't enjoy hearing. She met his gaze square across the little table. Why am I really here, Majesty? To eat. The pheasant is very good, and you've hardly touched it. You cannot possibly want a wife who insults you in taverns. He set his chin in his hand and regarded her with an expression of deeply wounded innocence. Why ever not you? But you don't believe a word of that, so let us bargain instead, since bargaining is a language you seem to trust. You told me, last night before the fire, that I have not the first idea how the rest of you live, that I couldn't find true hardship if it bit me. He leaned across the table toward her. So, show me. Take me out to your wood, and your wardens, and their whole hard lot of it, and let the two of us discover together whether it's all quite as easy as I so foolishly think it is. It was, she would understand only much later, the first genuinely clever thing the man ever did to her, because she could not resist it. She had meant to march him through it, stiff and cold as an inspection, and be rid of him. But the moment she stepped out under the great black pines with the cold, clean air biting her lungs, something in her chest that the whole evening had been strangling finally let go. She showed him the stores first. 40 snares requisitioned on the ledger, 12, and only 12, ever delivered to the racks. The same sorry tale with the oilcloth, and the lamp fat, and the good ash arrows, every single month going back years. He ran one hand slowly along the row of empty waiting pegs and frowned. A real frown, not a performed one. Where does the rest of it go, then? That is precisely the question, isn't it? Corwin flags it every quarter. It goes up the chain to the treasury, and it dies there, silent. No one above us has ever once cared how a patrol actually eats or freezes out in the dark. She braced herself for the royal platitude. Instead, he said, "Show me the patrol roster." She blinked at him. "The roster? You said show me. I am being shown. Go on." And there was something almost boyish in the way he said it. The plain eagerness of a man handed a knotted puzzle he actually wants to work loose. So, she fetched the battered old ledger and stood watching, half suspicious as he turned the stiff pages. When his thumbs stopped and settled on the fourth line down, she heard herself speak before she could think better of it. No, there. The North Ridge doubled. He looked up sharply, and she found, to her own dismay, that she had drifted close enough that their shoulders very nearly touched, the two of them bent low together over the same page in the lamplight. She cleared her throat and made herself point. Two wardens standing where one would more than do, because the order came down twice and no one ever thought to cancel the first. Those two are freezing out there tonight, this very moment, for a clerk's careless mistake. So, cancel it, he said simply. I don't have the authority to cancel a standing order. You have it now. He straightened up. Cancel any order that's wasting your people, their bodies, their hours, their loyalty. I'll set it down in writing, under my own seal. If some clerk wants to stand and argue the point with you, tell me, who signs the orders when Corwin's away from the lodge? Whoever happens to be nearest the seal, and feeling important that morning, she said, a good deal drier than she'd meant to, and he laughed, a real one, sharp and surprised, startled right out of him, and she felt the answering pull at the corner of her own mouth, and hated how much she'd liked causing it. They crossed back together through the dark of the tree line, boots crunching, and it was Elira who heard it first, a scrape, leather dragging soft on rough bark, off to the left, where the shadows pooled, thick and black beneath the low pines. She stopped dead in the snow. Trouble? Kaelin asked. Far, far too loudly. Quiet. Her eyes swept the dark. She had walked this wood 1,000 nights and more. Something in it, tonight, was wrong. There by the deadfall, a shadow where no shadow had any business moving. It moved. She let out a slow breath. A fox, surely, only a fox. An arrow punched clean through the space where his skull had been half a heartbeat before, and buried its head deep in a pine trunk with a wet, final crack. She had him flat against the nearest tree before the sound had finished ringing. Stay behind me. Do not move anywhere. I can't see you. Figures came boiling up out of the black all at once. 4 of them, faces wrapped in dark cloth, blades already bare and low. She caught the first one's arm at the wrist, turned it hard against the joint, and put him down in the snow with a snap and a cry. The second came in, wide and fast, and she dropped clean under the arc of his cut and drove her elbow up into his throat, and he folded. The other 2 broke off at a whistle, one, sharp, clean, carrying note, out of the dark, and melted back into the trees the way smoke does. Not panicking, not scattering blind. A careful, disciplined, practiced retreat. Silence crashed back down over the wood. Elira held her low crouch, knife up and steady, heart slamming against her ribs, ears straining. And behind her, the king of all Norvain said, mild as milk, well, you do know how to make an evening memorable. Warden, I'll grant you that. She rounded on him. You are not even surprised. Someone has just put an arrow through the air where your head was standing, and you haven't so much as flinched. The truth of it arrived even as she spoke the words, cold and certain and sickening. This isn't the first time, is it? She rose slowly to her full height. Your Majesty, is someone trying to kill you? For half a single heartbeat, something real and unguarded flickered far back behind those pale gray eyes. And then, smooth as a shutter coming down, it was gone. For the better part of a full month, Elira set herself, doggedly, to the one single sensible question that any person could reasonably ask about a man who'd been shot at in his own wood, and then shrug the whole thing off. What, exactly, are you hiding? Because someone wanted Kaelin dead, she knew it now in her marrow, past all arguing. So she did the one thing in the world she was best at doing. She watched, she gathered. She turned her theories over and over on the long, cold, sleepless night watches, testing each one for weak seams. Was the marriage itself a shield of some kind, a blooded huntress kept always at his side, close enough to guard him, without his ever having to explain to a soul why? Every single day, she built herself a new answer, tidy and complete. And every single day, the infuriating king declined, gently, to help her prove one word of it. She would ask him a sharp-pointed question. He would hand her back a joke. She would press harder. He would flirt, sliding the whole conversation 3 full topics sideways, so smoothly and so quickly that she wouldn't notice the ground had moved until she was already standing somewhere else entirely blinking. She would corner him, hard on the matter of the arrow in the wood, and he would only tell her gravely that she was quite magnificent when she was suspicious. He gave her nothing at all that she could use, and a great, dangerous deal that she had no earthly idea what to do with. Because the longer she watched him for signs of danger, the more she caught herself to her disgust simply watching him. It crept up on her the way the deep, cold, does, slow and gradual. Then all at once, the first gray morning, he came down to the warden's stores. He tipped his dark head back against the doorframe, with the lamplight sliding golden down the long line of his throat, and she lost the thread of her own sentence, clean and entire in the middle of speaking it. "You stopped," he said, smiling that slow smile. "I'm thinking." She was not thinking, she was looking at his mouth. She caught herself doing it, and was furious about it, and it only somehow got worse from there. He came out to the east wall at the raw frozen edge of a night watch bearing 2 clay cups of hot spiced milk, and when he passed hers across the cold stone their fingers brushed only barely, and her whole arm lit up bright to the shoulder as if she'd touched a live coal. She very nearly dropped the cup, and covered the lapse by glaring hard out into the dark. "You're not watching the stars," he murmured, close beside her. His voice did something low and unfair to her insides, amused and quiet and meant for no ear in the world but hers, there in the dark. "They're rather outshone tonight, I think." "They're stars," she managed. "They'll outlast the both of us." And yet. He was looking at her openly now, taking his slow, unhurried time about it, the way a man looks at a thing he means to remember later. And Alira, who had faced down armed and desperate men in the dark without so much as a blink, found that she could not hold his gaze for the length of a single breath before she had to look away. He smiled down into his cup like a man who had just quietly won some private wager, and said nothing at all and let her stew in it. That was the truly unbearable part of him. He was toying with her plainly, and she could never ever tell how much of any of it was real. She could not even tell which of the 2 men she was falling for, the laughing fool from the festival or the sharp cold thing that lived beneath him. She knew only that she lay awake in her narrow bunk after the late watches, now her whole body humming and sleep nowhere to be found, and that her own traitor mind went straight to him in the dark every time, without fail. But she was still a warden to the bone, and a warden's oldest habits do not sleep even when their owner cannot. So, on the coldest morning of that long month, she went back out alone to the deadfall where the arrow had struck, and she did the one single thing that no one else in the whole castle could do half so well as she could. She read the ground. The snow had come and gone twice over since that night, softening and burying the sign, but Alira had never in her life needed fresh tracks to follow a trail. She found the deep pressure in the frozen earth where a man had knelt, patient, to steady a bow against his shoulder. She found the long drag of a boot heel where he'd turned, all at once at the sound of that clean, sharp whistle. And then, because she was thorough to a fault, and because something deep in her would not let the thing lie quiet, she followed the retreat itself, back through the black pines, slow and patient, one faint wrong thing leading to the next. She had fully expected the trail to run hard for the border. Everyone had said as much. Foreign coin, a rival crown to the north, some old enemy come quiet over the line to put an arrow in the young king while he was still new and weak on the throne. That was the story. That was the very thing the doubled patrols were out there straining their eyes to catch. The trail did not run for the border. It never once turned its face north. It wound its slow way back down through the wood instead, careful and unhurried and utterly sure of its own footing every step, past the old boundary stones, past the outer pickets, that should by every rule have challenged it, and somehow, impossibly, had not, and in, at the last, through the warden's own gate. Elira stood alone in the deep snow with her breath clouding white in front of her, and her heart gone suddenly, entirely quiet, and understood, all at once and past any hope of unknowing it, that whoever had loosed that arrow at the king had not come from outside the borders of Norvain at all. They had come from home. She kept the trail to herself. She told herself firmly that it was for want of hard proof, that she had only sign and instinct to go on, faint pressures in old snow, and not one single name she could set beside any of it. But the truth of the matter was uglier than that, and a great deal plainer. She did not know one single living soul in the whole cold castle that she could truly trust with what she had read out there in the snow. And the one person her gut kept turning toward to tell, turning toward, against all her own better sense, was the very man that the trail itself might, if she followed it home, condemn. So she carried the thing alone. And carrying it, in the end, made her reckless. It broke late in the little fletching room off the warden's hall, where she had gone hoping to be alone with her own crowded head for an hour, and had found him already there instead, sitting easy among the goose feathers and the pots of glue, as though he'd been waiting for her half the night, no ledger in his hands, no question about the patrols. Nothing at all that she could file the visit safely away, under just Kalin, in the low lamplight, watching her come in. "What do you want?" It came out raw and cracked down the middle. "Elira," he said, only her name, quiet, and the sound of it in his mouth undid her worse than any argument in the world could have. No, her hands were not steady, and for once she did not care who saw it. "Every day you won't tell me what you're truly after, and you won't leave me be, and I cannot keep doing this. I can't, so tell me it's a scheme, Kalin. Tell me you needed a good blade near you that couldn't be bought or turned. Tell me anything at all that makes plain sense, because I was not built to want things I can never keep, and you are making me want." She stopped. Far, far, too late. "Want what?" he asked low. And there was no teasing at all left in him, now, none. "You know full well what you've known for days, and you've been enjoying it." He stood slowly. He came round the end of the bench toward her at an unhurried pace, the exact, careful way a person approaches a wild thing that might yet startle and bolt for the door. "And what?" he said very quietly. "If I simply want you." He was close now, close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his eyes. "At all. Men like you," she whispered, "do not want women like me." And she was staring at his mouth again, as she said it. Curse her own traitor eyes. "You don't believe me." His voice had dropped to something soft as snow settling. "So tell me to stop right now, and I'll go, and never trouble you again as long as I live. Or, softer still, barely a breath between them, ask me to prove it to you." The little room had gone very, very quiet. Her own pulse was very loud in her ears. "Prove it," she heard herself say. He kissed her, and every last careful, guarded thing in Elira's head went white and silent and still all at once. His hand came up and slid into her hair, and his mouth was warm and certain, and unhurried and thorough, and there was no audience for it anywhere. No hall, no witnesses, no crown, nothing at all in the whole, cold world but the two of them, and the low gold lamplight. Her knees plainly forgot their one task. And then her nose caught up at last to the rest of her, and what it found there simply wrecked her. His want, unmistakable, rolling off him in a hot, dark wave, the plain and helpless and undisguised desire of a man who wanted her, badly, for no other reason under heaven than that she was exactly herself. And that was the thing that folded her in half. Elira had been wanted before in her life, for her blade, for her keen eye, for her nose, for her long, cold, uncomplaining nights of good work. She had been useful. Twence. She had never once in all her 26 years stood squarely in the path of a man's plain wanting, with nothing at all to offer it but her own bare self. She fisted one hand hard in his collar and dragged him down and kissed him back like a woman who had been thinking of little else for a fortnight, because she had, and felt the rough, broken sound of it catch low in his chest against her palm. This was not a scheme. This was not a strategy, or a shield, or a clever move in some longer game she couldn't see. This was only, simply, a man who wanted her for no reason on earth but the wanting of her. And, God's help her, God's help them both, she wanted him right back. Elira had stood guard at the edges of 100 grand feasts in her time. She had never once in all her life been a guest at a single one of them. And now here she stood at the head of the great hall in deep green silk, feeling stripped bare and horribly exposed, while the southern envoys of Ashfell drank down Norvain's good wine, and the widowed Queen Izara watched the shining room over the rim of her cup with dark, clever eyes that missed nothing. And Kaelin moved through the thick of it, wearing his idle, charming smile like a suit of armor. She caught his eye once across the crowded floor, and he sent her something quick and private in return. The small, true, unguarded smile, the one he'd worn that very morning when she'd risen from his bed in the thin gray light, and the hard knot that lived beneath her ribs eased, just slightly, half a turn. Later he drew her out of the noise and onto a cold stone gallery high above the sleeping gardens, where the music thinned away to almost nothing, and the winter air came up sharp and clean off the snow. For a long moment, neither of them spoke a word. "You hate this," she said at last, watching the side of his face. She had spent these last stolen days learning the shape of his laughter in the dark. The way he said her name when he thought no one could hear. She could tell, now when the man was and was not enjoying himself. He laughed, surprised, and real, startled out of him. "Hate is a very strong word, Warden. You're lying to me. I am, aren't I?" He turned to face her fully, and the charming ease slid clean off his face and left something else underneath it that looked simply, deeply tired, worn thin to the bone. "I've been doing this since I was 19 years old, you know." The smiling, the performing, the endless being of exactly what every last one of them needs me to be, so that not one of them ever looks too closely or too long at what I'm plainly not. And some nights, standing in a room like that one, I honestly cannot decide whether that makes me clever or only— He stopped himself short, shook his head once, smiled again, but it came out thin and brittle and defensive at the edges. "Never mind me. Too much wine and not enough sleep. Ignore the maudlin king." She reached up slowly and laid her cold hand against the side of his warm face. His breath caught in his chest. The false, brittle smile crumbled clean away. "You're so much more than the performance of you," she said, very quietly, holding his eyes. "And the man that's underneath it, the one you keep hidden away from all of them." She paused. "I like him very much." Something cracked wide open behind his eyes at that. "Elira," he said, rough, and then he kissed her, fierce and grateful, and something very close to desperate, and the whole world tilted quietly on its axis, because it wasn't the heat this time, it wasn't the wanting she'd come to know. It was something else entirely pouring in through the place where they touched. Relief and old fear and a fierce and aching tenderness. All of it distinct and clear and vivid and utterly, impossibly not her own. His very heart laid bare against hers. Elira wrenched back with a sharp gasp, and Kaelin's gray eyes were blown wide and startled, and neither of them said aloud the old word for the thing that had just happened between them, because to say it out loud would be to make it real, and neither yet dared. And then a servant appeared, silent, at the gallery's far edge, A silver tray balanced flat on one palm. 2 cups of wine upon it, dark as fresh blood in the cold moonlight. "Your Majesty," the man murmured, and offered the tray up. And Elira's wolf snarled. She did not think. She did not breathe. Her hand shot out and struck the near cup clean from the king's fingers half an instant before it reached his mouth, and glass shattered bright across the stone. "Don't touch it," she said, already dropping into a crouch above the spreading dark stain, her voice gone strange and low and not her own. "Underneath the wine, the oak, the fruit, do you smell it?" She watched his own nostrils flare wide as he bent, and caught it too. The bitter, cold, killing edge, hiding down beneath the sweet. "Wolfsbane," she said grimly, "or something near enough kin to it to make no difference." Enough to stop an alpha's heart mid-beat. The color drained out of his face. And then it hardened over, not with fear she saw, but with something cold and fast and calculating. "You will say nothing," he said low and urgent. "Not to the wardens, not to the queen, not to a single soul. There is a foreign crown standing not 50 feet from us through that wall, Elira. And if it is so much as whispered that a man tried to murder me under my own roof, at my own feast with her envoys as my guests, I will have open war on my hands before the candles gutter out." She wanted to take him by the collar and shake him. He caught both her hands in his instead, hard. "I need you to trust me, just this once, just this one time. Let me handle this my own way." And because she could still feel the raw ghost of his fear pressing against her own skin through that new and terrible openness between them, she heard herself promise it, and hated the promise bitterly, even as it left her mouth. He pressed his lips once to her brow, quick and grateful, and then he was gone, and the easy mask slid smoothly back down over his face as he went. She gave him a slow 30 count. Then she followed, down 2 winding flights of stair, along a dark and empty corridor, to a heavy door she knew far too well, the private quarters of the master of the hunt himself. She eased it open on silent hinges. Kaelin stood behind Corwin's desk in the dark. A strongbox lay open before him, its lock sprung, and a thick fan of papers was gripped tight in one of his hands. He looked up slowly and found her frozen in the doorway. For one long, breathless moment, neither of them moved so much as a muscle. "Elira," he said, very calm, very quiet, very steady. "This is not what it looks like." Kaelin never paused. Not ever. He always had the answer ready and waiting in his mouth before you had even finished the asking of the question. But now he stood there behind Corwin's sprung strongbox with the stolen papers gripped tight in one hand, and he paused. "Say something," she begged him, without a single word. "Anything. Please." His jaw tightened. "Someone tried to put wolfsbane into your cup not 1 hour ago," she said instead, and heard her own voice shake. "You told me to breathe, not one word of it. And then you come straight down here, in the dark, to rifle the private strongbox of the man who raised me. So tell me, Kaelin, what in all the frozen north is going on?" He set the papers down slowly on the desk. "I have been investigating, Corwin," he said. The words would not resolve into any kind of sense. They were only sounds. "The supplies that never arrive," he went on. Gentle now, terribly gentle. The smooth, practiced voice he used on frightened envoys and grieving widows. The one he had not used on her in weeks. "Your own wardens freezing to the bone on doubled watches, night after night, for what everyone calls a clerk's careless mistake. None of it is a mistake, Elira. Not one piece of it. It is deliberate, all of it, and it has been for years. He has been quietly bleeding. The coin meant for your patrols, straight into the coffers of House Harrow for 3 winters running. And the men who have tried 3 times now to put me in the ground, they have been carrying his silver in their purses." The floor went straight out from under her. "No," she said. "No, not Corwin. You don't know him. He pulled me out of a snowbank with his own hands when I was 9 years old and dying. He is the one honest thing I have ever—" She stopped. Because underneath the frantic noise of not Corwin, never Corwin, something cold and dreadful had already begun to assemble itself into a shape. You needed someone close to him, she heard her own voice say from far away. Someone he trusted without a second thought. Someone already inside his gate. Her breath came ragged. That's why you said yes to me in the tavern. You'd been hunting for months for a way in under his guard. And a cornered, desperate fool grabbed your sleeve and handed you one. He did not deny it. He held her eyes across the dark little room and said, absolutely nothing at all, and the nothing was somehow so very much worse. Say I'm wrong, her voice cracked, clean, down the middle. Kaylin, look at me and say I'm wrong. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and he did not say that she was wrong. She pressed the heels of both her hands hard against her eyes. All of it. The roster, the empty stores, the idle questions about who held the seal. She had let herself think he was interested. It was all a lie, she whispered into her own hands. Not all of it. He came around the end of the desk toward her, and she stepped back sharply into the corridor, and again he stopped himself. Dead, at once. The marriage began as cover. I will not stand here and pretend to you that it didn't. But it stopped being. Why not simply arrest him then? She interrupted, savage. You're the king. You could have taken him 100 times over. Being king does not make me untouchable, Elira. I wish to every god that it did. His careful steadiness frayed and thinned at the edges. Corwin commands the loyalty of every warden in the whole of the north. An old name, powerful friends in high cold places. If I had moved on him, on nothing but a hunch, there would have been blood frozen in the snow by the next dawn. His men's, and yours, and mine. I had to be certain. I could not move until I held something not one living soul could stand up and argue with. It was a good answer. That was the very worst of it. And she hated him for how good it was. He held the thick sheaf of papers out toward her across the dark. Read them yourself if you won't take my word. He is bleeding your wardens dry, coin, and blood both. The very same exhausted men you stood up and defended to my face by the fire on the long night. No, she would not so much as look at them. Because Corwin was the one single thing in the whole of her hard life that had never, not once, been a lie to her. Not everyone in the world is like you, she said, and her voice was low and shaking. Some people are only ever exactly what they say they are. The tears came at last, hot, and she let them fall and did not wipe them away. Is that why you never told me any of it all these weeks? You thought I was in it with him. You thought I was part of it. No, gods. Elira, no. His hand shot out and stopped. If anything, you are the one person in this entire castle I cleared before I'd even finished asking. Why? She said, before she could stop the word. Because you were cornered that night, in the tavern. Not scheming. Cornered creatures don't dissemble, Elira. They haven't the room left in them for it. They simply say the one true thing. And the true thing you said, in front of that whole hall, was that every last thing wrong in this kingdom was my own fault, and mine alone. His mouth twisted, bitter. Half my court believes exactly that. And not one of them, in 2 long years, would ever dare say it to my face. But you did. You stood there and you did. That is how I knew you were no part of any of it. He took a slow half-step closer to her. Was that truly your own conclusion? That night, that the useless boy king alone was to blame for the whole rotten lot of it? Or was that, perhaps, something the good master helped you, patiently, over long years, to see? She opened her mouth, and nothing came out of it. Because she could hear it. Now, she could hear it so clearly it turned her stomach, Corwin. Across 100 long, cold nights by the lodge fire, grinding his teeth low over the supply lines and the contradictory orders. A king ought to know what's done in his own name. He's too busy at his feasts to trouble himself with the likes of us. Her own words from the tavern. His words first. His words for years. She had carried the man's grievances around in her own mouth for years, and never once noticed that they had never truly been hers. "You should have told me," she said, and her whole body was shaking now. "I didn't think you would believe me," he answered, barely above a breath. "I didn't think you would ever trust me over him, not in 1,000 years." He looked at her. "And I was right, wasn't I?" It landed like an open-handed blow across the face, because it was not in any part wrong. "Good night, Your Majesty," she said, and she turned and walked out of the little room and into the dark. It was all a lie. She pressed both hands hard against her eyes in the dark of the corridor, hard enough to see bursting sparks behind them. Gods. But she had been a fool, a blind, wanting, stupid fool, a Lyra. The voice cut down the length of the dark corridor toward her like a thrown knife. Corwin stood, not 10 paces off, just standing there in the shadows, still as stone, as though he had been waiting there in the dark for her to come out all along. And before she could think a single wise thought, before her better sense could catch her, she was already moving toward him, because this was the man who had hauled her bodily out of the frozen snow when she was 9 years old and nobody's child, and had made her, patiently, over long years, into someone who could stand on her own 2 feet in the world. Except that she was not standing very well at all just now. His 2 broad hands came down warm and steady on her shoulders. "What's happened? You're white as bone, girl. Talk to me." And because it simply hurt too much to hold inside her one heartbeat longer, she told him that it had all been a lie from the very first, that Kaelin had never truly wanted her at all, that he had only ever used her to get close to. "I know," Corwin said gently, sorrowfully. "I know, child. I had hoped, God's witness me, to spare you ever having to learn it. I'm so sorry, Elira," she thought, distantly, numbly, that he had probably known the shape of it from the very first night, that they had all known. Every last one of them in the whole castle had known, everyone but her. "But it is worse than you yet know," Corwin went on, his voice dropping low and grave, "far, far worse. And it grieves me to be the one to tell you. That poison, tonight, at the feast, he did that, he staged the whole thing himself. I saw it done with my own 2 eyes. He means to lay the blame for it at the feet of the Ashfell envoys, and so force the war with the South that he has wanted from the very start of his reign. A king who would murder under his own roof and blame it on his guests to buy himself a war. That is not a man fit to wear a crown. Elira, he has to fall." Elira went very, very still. Because it was wrong. Every word of it was wrong. She had smelled the wolfsbane herself. She had struck that cup from Kaelin's own hand with her own arm, out on a cold, empty gallery, where not one other living soul had stood in the moonlight, but the 2 of them and a single silent servant, and Corwin had been 3 full floors below them the whole while, down in the roaring hall. He could not possibly have seen the thing he was now describing to her in such careful detail, because it had not happened anywhere the way that he was saying it had. The timeline was wrong. The place was wrong. The whole story was wrong, root and branch. Which meant that the man who had pulled her out of the dirt, the one honest thing in all her life, was standing here in the dark and lying to her face, and that Kaelin, whatever else he had done, had told her the plain truth. Her hand twitched, once, toward the knife at her hip. Old, deep instinct. Not yet. Not here. Not one lone woman against the master who commanded the loyalty of every warden in the north. "What do we do?" she asked him instead, and made her own face crumple and break around the words like a woman with a shattered heart. Corwin's eyes sharpened with something that was almost, but not quite, hidden. "We go to the Southern Queen. Tonight now, before he can twist any of it against us. A king exposed before a foreign crown as a poisoner, and a would-be warmaker will fall, and fall hard. And there are good, strong houses standing ready to steady the realm after he is gone from it." A small pause. House Harrow, chief among them, of course, and there it was. The whole rotten shape of the thing, laid bare and plain in 3 short words for anyone with the ears to hear it. But it cannot come from me, you understand. I am only a huntsman. They will say, I grasped for power over my king's dead body, and they will not be entirely wrong. No, it has to come from someone that room will believe, without question. His voice went soft, and warm, and almost unbearably kind. It has to come from you, Elira, the king's own chosen bride. If you stand up before Queen Isora and tell her, weeping, that you saw him do this thing with your own eyes, then not one single soul in that whole room will doubt so much as a word of it. Elira made herself slowly nod. And so the two of them walked together through the dark castle, and it was, without any question, the longest walk of her entire life, because she had to get herself into that bright room and turn Corwin's own careful trap clean back over the top of his head. And she had absolutely nothing in the world to do it with. No proof, no allies at her back, no plan, nothing at all but her own bare word against his, and the cold, certain knowledge that a single wrong syllable spoken in that room could set the whole of the realm alight from border to border. The Southern Queen had taken a private council room for herself in the east wing of the castle. Kaelin was already there when Elira came in through the door behind Corwin, and he looked up at the sound, and for half a single heartbeat his whole face simply lit, helpless and glad. And then he saw plainly who it was she had walked in beside, whose shoulder she stood at, and the light went straight out of him, all at once, like a candle pinched, dead between 2 fingers. Your Majesty, Corwin said to the Queen, and bowed low and grave. It grieves me beyond all my poor words to bring this before you tonight, and under your own roof, of all places. But there was cold murder attempted in this castle not 2 hours past, and the hand behind it belongs to the very man standing there at your right side. He laid it out then, smooth and grieving and sure, the staged poison at the feast, the war against Ashfell the king, meant to buy with a lie and a corpse. That is a lie, Kaelin said, quiet and clear. And every single word of it is his own invention. He would say precisely that, Majesty, Corwin answered, sorrowful as a graveside. Of course the man would, but the king's own bride was there upon that gallery. She saw it all. He turned, slowly, and the whole room turned along with him, every face swinging round to Elira, where she stood silent and small by the door. And it is plain to all here that the woman loves him, that she has every reason under heaven to shield the man she is pledged to wed at dawn. He held out one open hand toward her, an offering, a trap. And so, ask her. Go on. Ask her yourself, Majesty. Elira, tell her Grace exactly what you saw upon that gallery tonight. Every last face in the bright room swung round and fixed on her. The Southern Queen, leaning slowly forward in her great chair, dark eyes narrowed and weighing Corwin's own terrible, patient certainty, already counting her safely into his column, already spending the win. And Kaelin, who believed, she saw, who fully believed that she had come into this room at his enemy's side to bury him, his jaw set hard, his shoulders squared, bracing his whole body for the killing blow to land. For one long, terrible moment, the Queen's dark gaze moved from Elira's stricken face to Corwin's grave and steady one, and Elira saw the great scale of it tip toward the man with the calm, sorrowful voice and years of good standing, and she saw the king, across the room, close his eyes. I'm sorry, she told him, with no words at all. Across all that cold, bright space, I should have believed you the very first time. I'm sorry. And then she turned to face Queen Isora directly, and lifted her chin. I saw nothing of the sort, she said, and her voice rang clear and steady in the silence. Because it never happened. Not one word of it. The master of the hunt is lying to you, your grace, to your face, and in your own borrowed hall. The whole room drew tight as a bowstring at full draw. Beside her, Corwin went rigid as a dead tree. He tells you he saw the poison poured tonight. Elira went on, faster now, before her nerve could fail her. But it was I who caught it. I struck that cup from the king's own hand, on a gallery where the master never once set foot. I smelled the wolfsbane myself. He was 3 floors below us in the hall the entire time before 400 witnesses. He could not have seen a thing. She faced the queen full on. And there have now been 3 attempts made on King Kaelin's life. Inside 2 months. I am the king's warden of the Winterwood, and I track for my living, the one thing I do better than any soul alive. I followed the trail of the men who came for him in the wood with my own 2 eyes. And it did not run for any border. It never once turned north. It ran home. In through the warden's own gate, her chin came up higher. So search the master's quarters now tonight, this very hour, while he stands here before you and cannot reach them to burn a thing. And see for yourself whether you find the proof of some wronged foreign crown, or a paymaster's ledger, and a file of the very wolfsbane that could stop an Alpha King's heart. This is hysteria. Corwin's long calm splintered straight across at last. Your Grace, the girl is distraught. She's been used and cast off, and she doesn't know what she's saying. Then a search of your quarters will cost you nothing at all, master, said Queen Azora, very quietly, and turned her head, and nodded once to her own guards. And Corwin's face changed. All at once, the grave and honest and sorrowful master was simply gone, wiped clean away, and what stood there in his place, cornered at last, was something else entirely. He came at her, and she saw the thin knife slide free from his sleeve into his palm a full half-beat before he reached her. Elira? Kaelin's voice torn straight down the middle, raw with pure terror. But this one single thing out of the whole long and terrible night, was the one thing in all the world that Elira knew how to do in her sleep. She turned into him, not away inside the reach of the blade, and caught the knife arm hard at the wrist, and used the whole of the big man's own driving weight against him, to fold him down and over and face first onto the cold stone floor, her knee dropping hard between his shoulders to pin him there. She leaned down, close to his ear. You taught me to read a trail, Corwin, she said, low, just for him. You should have remembered I'd read yours. Then the queen's guards were on him, and they hauled him up off the stone and dragged him out of the room. And it was done. It was over. The room came apart into voices and motion. Kaelin crossed the length of it to her side in an instant. Elira. His hand came up, reaching for the side of her face, the exact way it had out on the gallery. She stepped back, once, clean out of its reach. He froze where he stood, the touch ungiven, hanging in the cold air between them. You came for me, he said, and his voice was wrecked. You believed me. In the end, you believed me. I believed the evidence, she said, and her voice was steady and cold and level, and it cost her every last thing she had left in her to keep it so. That is not the same thing, Majesty. It never was. She had saved his life, and unmade her own world in the very same breath, and she could not stand there and let him look at her like that. Not with the great lie he had built her on, still smoking on the stone floor between their feet. Good night, Your Majesty, and she turned, and she walked out, the wound still open and bleeding. And no one alive, least of all Elira herself, yet able to say whether it would ever close. It took the better part of a full year before she would let him near enough to so much as try. She heard of him only the way the whole realm did, that long year. In tavern talk, in market rumor, in the warden's low, fireside gossip. She heard he had struck the right of claim clean out of the old books inside the very first month of it. The barbarous law she had raged against by the festival fire, simply gone, so that no lord in all of Norvain would ever again file a cold paper on an unmated wolf and call it his right. She heard he had hunted the rot of House Harrow out of every province in the north, root and stem, and hanged the paymasters from their own gates. She heard he had stopped, mostly, pretending to be a fool for anyone. What she would not do, all that long, year, for all of it, was answer a single one of his letters, and there were a great many letters. And she kept the strange new bond between them, shut fast behind a bolted door in her own chest, and refused, night after night, to feel him through it at all, because feeling him was exactly how she had been made a fool of the first time. And Alira did not make the same mistake twice. And then the long night came round again, the way it always does. She had not meant to go. She had meant to spend it alone, up in the cold trees, where she belonged. But the wardens dragged her down out of the black wood and into the gold and the noise and the warmth of the great mead hall, the way they had a year before, and the hall was exactly, achingly, as it had been. And there, standing by the great central fire, was the king of all Norvain, watching the door for her as though he had been standing there watching it for a full year, and meant to stand there a year more. "Warden," he said. And then, to the whole watching hushing hall, he did a thing that no king in living memory had ever once been known to do. He went down, slowly, onto one knee, on the bare mead hall stone. A sound went through the hall like wind through wheat. "A year ago," Kalen said, and pitched his low voice to carry to every corner. "On this very night, in this very hall, a woman I had never once met stood up and told me, to my face, that I couldn't find an injustice if it crawled up and bit me on the nose." A breath of startled laughter moved through the crowd. And she was right. I had stopped looking. I had stopped looking years before. She made me look again. His voice was steady and even, but through that bolted door she'd shut so tight in her own chest. Elira felt it anyway, felt everything the man was feeling, pouring straight through the bond, unguarded and undammed. No mask on it, no angle, no scheme. Fear and hope. And a want so plain and so helpless, and so entirely without artifice, that it stole the breath clean out of her own lungs where she stood. I have spent the whole of the year since then earning the right to ask her this one thing. So, he lifted his gray eyes to hers, and for once in his life there was nothing hidden anywhere behind them. "Be mine, Alara, and if you cannot yet, then pretend, if you must, only pretend, that you could love a reformed and repentant fool. Just until sunrise, just the one night, and I will spend every last sunrise that comes after it proving to you that you need never pretend at all." The corner of his mouth lifted, terrified and certain, both at once. "I dare you." The whole hall leaned in as one body, holding its breath. And Elira stood there in the firelight, caught fast and helpless between the powerful and rising urge to throttle the man where he knelt, and the equally powerful and far more traitorous urge to haul him up off the freezing stone before he caught his death of cold, and could not, for the whole of her life, make her own voice work in her throat. "Ask me at sunrise," she managed at last, low when she could speak at all. "When the long nights burned all the way down and you can't lay the blame on the fire or the mead or the crowd or the moment. When you've had the whole cold night to think better of it and come to your senses. Ask me then, Kalen, if you still want to." His gray eyes searched her face, hungry. "And you'll say yes," he breathed. It was not quite a question. She opened her mouth to answer him, and found she did not quite trust her own voice, not to give the whole game away too soon. So instead, she only reached down, slowly, and pressed her bare palm flat against the side of his jaw, the way he had once reached for hers on a cold gallery a lifetime ago. And she let the bolted door in her chest swing open. Just once, just for a moment, just for him. Let the bond swing wide between them, so that he could feel for himself, past all her cold words and all her careful walls, exactly how very close the yes already was. His breath caught, his eyes went bright and wet. "Ask me at sunrise," she said again, softer than she had ever said anything in her life, "and find out." He asked her at sunrise. He asked her badly, in point of fact, cold and hoarse and utterly undone, kneeling in the frost with the first thin gray light of dawn coming up gold and pink over the white winter wood behind him. And half the festival passed out cold in the rushes all around them, and Elira looked down at the king of all Norvain. Kneeling there in the snow, with his whole heart laid out plain and open in his hands and no crown anywhere in sight on him. And she said yes, the whole of the realm came out for the wedding, in the end. The fool king that nobody had ever taken the least bit seriously, and the low-born huntress out of the cold wood, who had somehow seen the true man standing there behind the easy smile before anyone else had ever thought to bother looking at all. He wept during the vows, of course. She'd known that he would. She very nearly did not, but the bond, wide open between them now and forever, gave her away regardless, as it always would, and he laughed at her through the shine of his own tears. And after that, she quite stopped caring who in the world saw. "You're stuck with me now," he murmured against her hair, when at last it was done and sealed. "For good and all, no taking it back." "Now why," said Elira, "would I ever want to take it back? I'm the one who proposed to you first, if you'll recall it rightly, though I only ever asked for a husband until sunrise." She looked up at him and past him, at every sunrise still to come after this one, stretching away white and gold and unending. "You're the one who went and made it a lifetime. Best decision you ever made in your life," the king of all Norvain concluded, entirely certain of himself, and kissed her in the falling snow. And for once, just once, Elira did not argue the point. Thanks for listening. I do hope Elira and Kaelin kept you warm all the way through the long night. Tell me down below, at what exact point did you finally forgive him? Was it the moment he confessed the whole of it over Corwin's sprung strongbox? Or only when a king of the realm went all the way down on one knee in the frost and dared a huntress to love him? Or are you perhaps a little more like Elira herself, and think the man's still got a great many long cold sunrises of honest groveling left ahead of him yet?